George Washington, President 1789 to 1796. America's first president, George Washington, remains history's only unanimous choice for president. History records that Washington garnered 1 vote each from all 69 participating electors. Electors casting second-choice votes were divided. The most, 34, went to John Adams, making him the country's very first vice president. While George Washington's birthday has long been celebrated on February 22nd, he was technically born on February 11th, 1731. As a youngster, he celebrated his birthday on the latter date. However, in 1750, the British Parliament changed the type of calendar used. The jumbled result added 11 days to the new Gregorian calendar, giving Washington a revised birthday of February 22nd. The father of the future president was Augustine Washington. Augustine fathered 10 children in all, 4 by his first wife and 6 by his second wife. George was his 5th child, but the very first given birth by second wife Mary Bell Washington. Augustine died when young George was but 11 years old. Washington then went to live with a half-brother Lawrence, who built Mount Vernon. Washington was said to have a keen ability in mathematics and an attraction for the outdoors. The two factors apparently led to an early interest in surveying land. As a teenager, he was earning money as an apprenticed surveyor. Washington first served in the military in 1753 under the command of the governor of Virginia. Back once again in civilian life, he was married in 1759 to Martha Dandridge Custis, a widow. The two made their home at Mount Vernon, where Washington maintained the large land holdings inherited from his stepbrother's estate. When the American Revolutionary loomed, Washington eventually became commander-in-chief of the American Army. General Washington commanded for 7 long years, staving up British forces in a series of up-and-down military encounters. A staunch supporter of a concept of an independent but powerful country, Washington called for a constitutional convention immediately after the British surrender. During the writing of the U.S. Constitution at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 in Philadelphia, Washington served as chairman of the convention. Once the Constitution was completed, the next step for the young nation would be to elect a president. The election of 1789 was late getting underway. It had first been set for March 4th of that year in New York City's Federal Hall. However, due to weather and various other delays, it did not occur until more than a month later. As there were no true political parties at the time, each elector could vote for 2 persons, basically a first choice and a second choice. Washington won the election by winning all the first choice votes. President George Washington took that first oath of office outside the Federal Hall there in New York. Shortly afterwards, he delivered his inaugural address in the Senate chamber. Initially, Washington lived at No. 1 Cherry Street in New York City. Technically, it was not the presidential mansion, but simply the Washington residence. In the early years of this country, living quarters were not provided for the president by the federal government. When Washington was elected to a second term, he took the oath of office in Philadelphia. America's second president, John Adams, was also inaugurated in Philadelphia. As the first of everything, in our situation will serve to establish a precedent. Washington once wrote to James Madison, "It is devoutly wished on my part that these precedents might be fixed on true principles." Washington served 2 full terms but declined a 3rd term in the belief that 2 terms were enough for any one president. That Washington precedent remained in place until 1940, when Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected for a 3rd term. Later, the U.S. Constitution was changed, limiting all future presidents to no more than 2 full terms. The first president died at Mount Vernon on December 14, 1799, after less than 3 years in retirement. He was buried there in the family vault. The nation was in mourning for months afterward. In the mind's eye of America, President Washington is seen as he was depicted in the Farm Portrait by artist Gilbert Stuart. That remarkable portrait was one of the few objects originally put in the White House in 1800. It was one of the few objects saved by First Lady Dolly Madison when she fled the British invasion of Washington, D.C. in 1814. Presidential site: Mount Vernon George Washington Mansion, Mount Vernon, Virginia, 703-780-2000. Postcard of Gilbert Stuart Portrait, Cincinnati Art Museum. Postcard of Thomas Selly Painting, Washington Crossing Card Collectors Club. Washington Hatchet, early 1900s. Washington's birthday, early 1900s. Washington, early 1900s. Washington at Yorktown, posted 1910. George Washington engraved print copyright 1901, Gravure Company of America. Washington crossing the Delaware early 1900s. Washington, His Kindness, posted 1910. 3 Cheers for George, early 1900s. My Patriotic Greetings, copyright 1909. Washington in Private Life, early 1900s. Postcard of Portrait, early 1900s. Here's to the Birthday, early 1900s. Battle of Trenton, early 1900s. George and Martha Washington, 1938. Washington, His Truthfulness, copyright 1909. Mount Vernon, posted 1967. The President's House, posted 1914. Washington Bedroom, Mount Vernon, 1950s. Washington's Mount Vernon, early 1900s. Washington's Headquarters, early 1900s. Washington Monument, Philadelphia, posted 1905. His Candor, posted 1913. The Washington Tomb, 1960s. Washington's Valley Forge Office, early 1900s.